All right, welcome back, everyone. It is time for the public comment. Do we have anyone in the room who would like to make public comment? If so, please proceed to the microphone. And before making your comment, please state your name and affiliation clearly. Okay, I don't think we have anyone in person, so I would like to invite anyone who may be following us via the webcast, if they want to make a comment. The directions are to dial 1-800-369-1162. Again, that number is 1-800-369-1162 with a passcode of 3728766. Again, the passcode is 3728766. And then callers will need to press *0 to have the operator unmute the lines. So at this time, I would invite anyone who wants to call in to make public comment to do it at this time. Okay, I don't think we have anyone that's making public comment virtually then. I will recognize the fact that we did receive a written comment from the Pueblo of Laguna. However, this is a comment to the proposal for the federal working group on the revision of standards. So this is actually to Nancy Potok, Chief Statistician, so we'll make sure we pass along that comment to OMB. Okay, at this time, the public comment section is closed, and we will now turn it over to Carol, Vice Chair, who is going to moderate the next 2 hours for the committee discussion and working lunch.
Thank you, Nancy. I think we're going to wait for hard copies. So this is a new process, and we have a few, I would say, kinks in the process. If we fail to capture your recommendation, that's going to be one of my questions in the process to make sure that we receive them. Some of the emails went to Deedus and did not show up in my email box, so we've just got a couple little glitches in that process. So for those of you who weren't here first thing this morning, we've put those, your recommendations into buckets based on presentations or by work group so that we can address them collectively together. I've also tried to scribe what I heard might be a recommendation. It may or may not be. It may be just a comment. If so, we can clean that up as we go. We've also already asked Megan, as part of her work group presentation, to take the recommendations that came out of the NAC and take them back to her work group so that they could consider them, perhaps reword them, and bring them back. We are going to ask Jerlene to do the same thing, with the exception of the recommendations that have already been vetted by her working group, and she will ask us to consider them. I think it will be very difficult to see this, but I wonder, Jerlene, if we could handle your work group first. Can we get to the undercount of children until we get some hard copies in front of us? Because I think it will be difficult to follow until we actually have, and a bigger font would be helpful.
All right, they're going to put the three up on the screen. Great. And so let me just give you a modified definition of vetted by my work group. We took our general I took our general conversations, we agreed to about 3 that we thought we could make now. And so I wrote them up, so, they may still want to fiddle a little bit with the words, but the gist of it is there. So maybe what I'll do is, they're still working on putting it up, but I will read it out loud to you, and we can go from there. So the first recommendation from our work group is that all of the components supporting the 2020 census should appoint an individual responsible for the inclusion of the issues related to young children and the people in their lives. This includes, but is not limited to, partnerships, communications, ACS, field offices, enumerator training, etc. That's the gist of what the first recommendation is. Does anybody on the work group think that I've totally misconstrued what we said? If not, forever hold your peace.
I just add language.
What does that mean, add language? Hold on, what do you? Yeah, that. All right, there. What did you want to say?
The language working as well.
Oh, but this, I said, that's why it says includes but is not limited to, so that other things can be added. All right? So we'd like you to consider that as a recommendation, the NAC to consider that. Do you want to discuss each one individually and then, okay.
I think so. Let's take these one at a time because I think it'll be much faster that way. Is there any question, comment, concern about the recommendation?
Carol, just procedurally, I don't know, I'm finding it a little bit hard to vote on something that I can't see at the same time. Yeah. Maybe could we hold off the voting and maybe just move to things that we can also see at the same time? If that's-
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Jerlene, those are the recommendations?
Sorry, and I just read you the first one. Wonder, can I? If I hit these arrows, that'll make that bigger, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read it again, or are you okay, Ann?
So maybe we can vote on it now?
That's what we'd like to do.
Yep, doesn't seem to be any comments or questions, so.
Any opposition
Just-
to
just
this
one-
recommendation? Yes.
Just one clarification. When you say components, what you mean? Sorry.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, when you say components of supporting the 2020 census, what is components? Sorry.
Okay, so that's what I tried to begin to describe in the second sentence. So components includes things like the partnership agreements, the communications plan, training that they're going to do of enumerators, anything that makes the 2020 census go, and the various aspects of it, that there would be somebody who is specifically charged with the responsibility of making sure they have thought about and included issues related to young children, the counting of young children and the people in their lives.
Any other questions? In my world, we'd call for the question. Any opposition? All in favor? Great. Thank you.
Okay, the second recommendation reads the continuation of, probably should say supports, the continuation of the undercount of young children task force within the Bureau with a minimum, it should say requirement, of an annual report back to the NAC on finding as the research is further delineated. So within the Bureau, they have, maybe since 2015 or so, had a task force that's studying and trying to unravel the undercount of young children. And so I'm saying, we're saying we'd like to support the continuation of that group and ask that that task force, at least annually, give us some feedback on how they're coming. Because when you think about this, we're thinking about, 10 years from now, there'll be a census. And if we can think about how long it is taken, for example, to get the MENA category put out here, to get combined questions put forward, we need that the kind of lead time that we now have, and at least an annual reporting will keep the issue in front of you.
Yes.
In the Bureau.
Yeah. Jolene,
Yes.
if you don't mind, on this issue, two considerations is we are fast approaching deadlines for the 2020. You think that these reports should come more frequent than on an annual basis? It makes sense because of the deadlines we have now. And since, in fact, we meet in person twice a year, after maybe 2020, we should probably have a report every time this committee meets.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, and I think when I put in there at a minimum of, I'm thinking 10 years out, but that doesn't negate the possibility of more frequent reports. So I'm at the pleasure of work group members. What do you think about that?
I think I hear what you're saying, Hassan, but I think putting a burden of a semi-annual report, I don't know in a 6-month period how much of a quality report we would receive as opposed to annual report. We can request at the spring meeting or whenever we're saying the annual report is due, the meeting prior, we can request an update. But for sake of a quality document with stats, with really meaningful data, I would keep it as minimum annual report with periodic check-ins or updates.
Charlene, then let me ask you, between now and decisions that need to be made for the 2020 census, are there anything that you're going to be asking us to support or be aware of, so that we can have a say in terms of how the 2020 can address this issue of undercount of young people?
Okay, so there are part of what the Census Task Force Group and now the leadership in Scott and Gina are doing is unpacking this issue, looking at layers of research, creating new research, figuring it out. And for 2020, it's late to do things like change questions, et cetera. But there is time to be able to impact the outreach and the messages and so on. And as the director said, he thought, it's probably the outreach and the messaging and the communication that's going to be critical to try to get at these particular undercounted individuals. And so, in answer to your question, I think, yes, there are things that are going to come up that we will, want to weigh in on. The work group will see the communications plan in June and be able to give feedback on that. And so we will be vigilant about making sure that what we can do related to 2020 actually happens. And when I say, and so that includes things like reacting to the community survey, American Community Survey, and the deadlines related to that. That's something as a work group we're taking on, and will give feedback and make recommendations to the NAC as necessary.
Additional comments or questions about Jerry's recommendation number 2? I see no cards up.
Motion to support?
Great. All in favor? Aye. Great. Any opposed? All right, you have support.
All right, the third recommendation is, boy, you can tell I must have been getting tired. That, how's that for starting? That the CCMPES, and I've translation the coverage measurement survey.
Yeah, and it's PES as opposed to enumeration survey.
Okay. For 2020, have definite elements pertaining to the count of young children, should say, included. We're trying to make sure, and again, this is one of those supporting elements of the 2020, and so maybe there wasn't a need to do this at all, this third one, but it was something we talked about, so I put it out there. And so I would ask the working group, should we or should we not make this recommendation? Are you comfortable that what we wanted to say is in number 1?
Can I make a comment on this? Because I'm dealing with this in real time in California, where all our outreach for 2000, 2010, and moving forward for 2020 is going to be really data-based. And when we had our conversation with Scott, and then I'm like, oh, can you give me, the data, we missed all these people, where are they? Can you give me more data-oriented factors to help me in California, which I have a lot of children there. And they sort of didn't have, Jerry, you were there, they didn't have that type of granular data. And I wasn't quite sure why, if it wasn't built in, they weren't able to, they said there's a big undercount, but they couldn't really tell me where they were. Mm-hmm. So I think we're saying you guys need to do, a better sort of post-look to figure out where are we missing them, so that folks like me who run statewide outreach for all of you that work with outreach can better target. The director had said, we need to better target those people. It's only sort of a handful of folks to reach them. So, but I need the data. I can definitely approach my legislature and say, hey, I need a couple $1 million to improve the undercount of, to get rid of the undercount of our young children in California. But if I had better data to focus it, and I don't know, is that, is this where I would get that data, or do I have to kind of dig around at the California level and the state data center in order to secure that type? So.
Okay, I can't answer that question.
No, but that's why I wanted to, yeah.
All right. So what's the inclination of the working group? We leave this as a recommendation? Hello, people, wave or something.
I think we should.
Okay.
I think the more data, the better. I don't see the harm in actually having it.
All right, if there are no other questions or comments, Carol, we're ready.
Ready to vote? Number 3, all in favor? Say aye. Any opposed? Right. Thank you to Jerlene and the working group. We appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's worthy of applause. I will say I particularly appreciate the recommendation to keep this working group moving and moving along so that our focus on these young children doesn't just have an open and an end. I really appreciate that.
Well, you know, this particular recommendation is about the task force that's in-house in Census. It's not about this working group, although we considered such a recommendation. We figured we got a little time to make that one.
Yes, you do. All right, you should all have a hard copy of the recommendations that we've compiled in front of you, I think. Thanks to Julie and Karen, for helping us scribe your edits. So does everybody have a copy just to make sure for the process? All right. So what I propose to do, unless there's a different approach, I'd like to take these, start where we left off yesterday, because we had already some votes that were taken, and we had one open item under that bucket, and then I will move us on by bucket. As we go to those buckets, if you would just verify that your recommendations have been included, we don't want to miss a recommendation. So as you're reading the recommendations, please let us know if you've made one that is not represented on the written list, and that will help us capture everything. So any questions about the process? People want to go in a different direction? Let's give it a try. All right. So I would move us at the top of the list. Recommendation number 2 has benefited from an edit from James, who I think is online. And what you see on your sheet under recommendation number 2 is his recommended edited version of our discussion at the end of yesterday. All right, open it up for comments and questions. James, would you like me to read this out loud? I'm not sure you have a hard copy.
Sure, that would be great. And I did email Tara asking her to go ahead and email it to the folks who are on the phone.
Great. Okay, thank you. Want me to read it? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Number 2, the recommendation. The NAC recommends that when feasible, the Census Bureau will consult with and solicit feedback from the NAC about the impact of significant adjustments to the 2020 Census Operational Plan on achieving a fair and accurate census count before those adjustments are finalized. Questions, comments? Yes.
I have a question. I feel like we might have had a recommendation like this in the past, perhaps not specifically with regards to the 2020 census plan, but I think there's a lot of room for interpretation here. This concept of, significant adjustments, feasibility, I don't know. To me, it's not tight enough, I guess, is my concern. What might be feasible to us is not feasible, what might be significant. In talking to some of the census staff, it's quite clear that they are definitely moving down the pike, with the 2018 end-to-end, how likely it might be that changes could be made. I don't know. I'm just concerned.
I saw others share their concern. Yes, Ali Sue.
It seems like we're asking them, use us, as is, presumably the mandate. So I don't think we're adding anything that isn't already there, available to them.
Other comments? Desi, do you have any suggestions for us to consider?
I don't know. I agree with Ali Sue. I think we've had a lot of conversations about this in years past about our desire to be used and consulted, and so perhaps we just need to keep reiterating it. So, I'm happy to proceed.
Thank you. We have probably 2 choices, one to proceed as it's presented, or secondarily to just agree that it's already happening, or we've already proposed it and we move on and don't include it on the list. What's the pleasure of the group? Yes.
I would advocate for its inclusion because in the ambiguity facing the Census Bureau with its funding, we don't know what's going to happen, what decisions it will have to make. So all the more reason for us to reiterate that we want to be engaged.
Appreciate that. Anyone think differently? I'm going to look around the room for nods of heads. Okay, looks like, are we ready to vote? Okay, recommendation number 2. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Great. Got another. Let's move down. If you go down, if we're just going to take it in order as is presented on the written printout. So that would take us down to number 4 under recommendations on field tests. And James, I will read it out loud so that we all know where we are.
Point of
Yes.
order? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Megan asked me to ask us. Oh, you are here. Oh, I'm sorry.
We're in order? Great. Yeah. Yes, great. Thank you for that.
I think Megan is all over the place.
Accurate. All right, I'm going to move us on to item number 4 under field tests and the recommendation. Census should clearly explain the threshold for meeting, in quotes, a programmatic need for testing questions around gender identity and sexual orientation. We could add, in quotes, given the programmatic needs already identified, such as ... And Kirsten, you're the author of this. Did we capture?
Yeah, that's, I'm open about it just wasn't clear to me, the tipping point at which it would be included just in our conversation, so it would be helpful to have more clarity around it.
And I have a couple of edits if that would be cool.
Great.
So I think there's already been quite a lot of testing done. So the question in my mind is not about testing, but about inclusion of the questions on the American Community Survey. So that's one shift. And if we did want to have a sentence about given the programmatic needs already identified, I just wrote up a quick thing that says, given the programmatic needs already identified by federal agencies through the outreach process articulated by the director in his comments of April 26th, comma, Census, I'm going to show it to you in a second. Census should clearly explain the threshold for meeting a programmatic need for including sexual orientation and gender identity questions on the ACS. They're going to type that up, but does that sound like it's getting to what you want to get to?
That was much better. Thank you.
All right, right on. Thank you.
We'll wait till it's up on the board. And James, just because I am not very good at double tasking, please jump in if you have any comments.
Sure. Nat, are we on the first one under language accessibility?
No, we're under item number 4, field tests, under field tests. And we have I'll read it to you. They're offering an edit, so I'll read it as soon as it's up on the board here. I'm sorry, Stuart.
Do you want me to go ahead and read it for people to vote then? Are we okay, or?
That would be
Megan, you ready
great,
to
thanks.
Okay. Given the programmatic needs already identified by federal agencies through the outreach process articulated by the director in his comments of April 26, 2017, Census should clearly explain the threshold for meeting a programmatic need for including sexual orientation and gender identity questions on the American Community Survey.
Further questions or comments? I see none. Thank you, Megan, for the edits and Kristen for the authorship. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. Unless there are additional recommendations that don't appear on this list under field tests, I think that completes this category. Looking around, did we miss anything under this category? Seeing no cards up, we'll move on to the topic of language. Language accessibility on the 2020 census.
Oh, should I stop her? Carol, I think we may have missed one that was a new addition under the field tests. There
Great.
was one submitted by Desi. We had it kind of above it, kind of in the wrong spot here. I think this one applies. Oops, where did it go? Okay, so hold on just a second. Terry's moving it. So this one is a new one that was just sent to us by Desi, but since it's a part of this category, I thought we'd throw it in if that's okay.
Perfect.
Desi, do you want to, or I'll read it and then you can comment on this. NAC recommends the Census Bureau assess the feasibility of a second write-in line for the AIAN response category on the paper version of the 2018 end-to-end test, given the length of many tribe and village names. This would maximize detailed reporting and mitigate the need for an extensive public campaign to inform AIAN respondents to A, write very small, and or B, use the margins.
I'm not sure if that second sentence is needed, but it was more for clarification. So I think we heard today that, you know, up to 6 different responses are going to be recorded, but ultimately there's only, I think, 17 boxes or something for people to actually write their specific tribe or nation or village, and many of those are incredibly long, including the example in the actual census, which shows, I think it's native village of something something government, which is, you know, super long. So this is just a recommendation.
Do you want to remove that second sentence then and just make it the first sentence about adding a line? Is that what you just said?
I don't know. It's up to
you.
whichever is
Yours.
necessary. I don't know if we're doing justification or if we're just doing recommendation.
I think the same way as recommendation 3, you should just put it italicized as an explanation.
Okay, we'll put it under italics below, but do people want to vote on the recommendation?
Yeah. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Desi, for that recommendation. I'd welcome you to come to Alaska and try to spell some of the names, even my own village. Thanks for capturing that, too. We will move on to language accessibility. The first recommendation doesn't have an author. Yes, it does.
Oh,
James, this is yours.
That was mine, yes.
Yes, James. Shall I read it, James, or does everyone have it in front of them? Comments, questions? I see, Stuart, yes.
Yeah, maybe James could give us a little more background and clarification. I don't actually know what's being referred to in the very beginning of this.
Sure. James, would you give a brief explanation about this one, please?
Sure. One of the things that the Director of Census is required to do every 5 years is to make language accessibility determinations under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act. That basically requires that for those languages that are covered in covered county level or even in some cases statewide jurisdictions, that all voter registration materials and all materials associated with the voting process have to be provided both orally and in written form where the language is written in the covered language. And so because the Census Bureau just went through this process in December, they've used the ACS data, and we have very good data that actually identifies in the 33 county level jurisdictions covered for an American Indian language, and approximately, I think there were about, I want to say 11 census areas or boroughs in Alaska that were covered for Alaska Native languages. We actually know what those specific languages are that are covered, and that kind of goes above and beyond the, kind of the top tier languages that Census is already targeting, for providing language assistance. Many of these languages are actually they're with very small populations. We want to make sure that, especially with smaller populations where there may be a great need because there's a high percentage of LEP individuals who speak that language, that Census also takes sufficient efforts to make sure that when they're doing their outreach and they're actually doing the enumeration, that they're providing assistance in those languages to make sure that everyone's counted.
Thank you. Stuart, answer your question? Great. John?
Right, and I also think this is a great way to localize efforts and really target sort of micro populations, if you will, of limited English proficient groups. The other thing that I would note that I think is good is that it says as the starting point. So there are certain populations that are just at the cusp of making the 203 threshold. And in those situations, oftentimes we use those, our groups will use those as saying, okay, we should still target these areas even though it might not be technically covered. So that's a good way to phrase it.
I should add what John has said, because it actually gets to the next recommendation. This recommendation really does broadly apply to more than just American Indian and Alaska Native groups. And I think the language probably needs to be adjusted to refer to that that to the extent that there may be, especially we've gotten like Cambodian, Hmong, there have been a number of Asian languages in particular that have been identified at a much more local level. So I would actually propose amending it just to make clear that it's not going to be limited to American Indian and Alaska Native groups, but it would be any language group for which Census received that data as a result of the ACS determinations made in December.
Oh, thanks, James. I appreciate that. I missed that in reading it.
That's great. So you've proposed an edit. We'll try to capture that.
Maybe among other groups, so we're not limiting, so in parentheses, something like that, would that work?
I think so.
Among other language groups?
Or maybe you could just simply strike American Indian and Alaska Native and just have it read to identify limited English proficient parents, LEP, language groups.
I would just suggest maybe putting in parentheses, including American Indian, because I like the fact that you give some emphasis to that, because I think a lot of people often forget American Indian and Native Alaskan groups, whereas, although I'm speaking somewhat against my community's interest, Asian American populations, a lot of people will think of right away. So that
okay.
I don't mind it.
It's great. I think we've captured the edit.
Oh, sorry. Indian Alaska Native groups. How's that?
Julie, would you mind reading that out loud so
Sure.
James hears the edit?
The NAC recommends that the Census Bureau use the December 2016 determinations under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, which is derived from the ACS data, as a starting point to identify limited English proficient LEP language groups, including American Indian and Alaska Native groups, and the location of the LEP people who speak them as additional languages for which a census outreach and enumeration effort should be targeted.
Great. Thank you. James, did that capture your edit?
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect.
Great. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Ready to vote?
Support.
Yes, sorry, Hassan. Bill?
Nope.
All right.
Just-
All those in favor? Say aye. Nothing like a deadline to get us to move. Any opposed? Everybody wants to go home. I see no opposition. James, the next recommendation is yours as well. I think I'm going to just start reading them out loud because I think that's easier for everyone. So the next recommendation is, the NAC recommends that within the AI-AN language groups, the Census Bureau should account for dialectical differences. And then in parens, which I would guess is the italics, for example, the Yupik language includes over 24 spoken dialects. There are a sufficient number of variations in those dialects to require distinct translations. James, any explanation you want to provide to that?
Yeah, I'll actually use an example that we had come up where a word was used for inland Yupik speaking areas that meant bear, but you used the same word and you got closer to the coastal region and it meant seal. And in that case, it completely changed the meaning of what was said. one of the things that's actually come up when we've done translations in Alaska Native villages is we oftentimes drop footnotes down for dialectical differences in the Yupik language. And in some cases, those dialectical differences can be pretty substantial. In one case, we actually had a ballot measure where there were over 24 dialectical differences because even within villages that may be separated by 20 miles, in some instances, the dialects are sufficiently different that you can't use the same kind of one common form of Yupik for those villages. The only other thing I would add is, again, I do think that particularly for Asian languages, to a lesser extent with Spanish, I also think that there are dialectical differences that for which there should be some adjustments made for. So it may just simply be, it could be changed to read, the NAC recommends that within language groups, the Census Bureau should account for dialectical differences or something to that effect. I don't know that we necessarily need to refer to AIAN. I think it would be good to keep the example, but this definitely is a broader issue for other language groups as well.
Thoughts about capturing that edit? Yes, Ali Sue.
Just wanted to mention, James, that all the multilingual testing that the Bureau does, in recruiting respondents for those tests, we have to account for people, bring on board respondents who speak different national, regional variations of the language, dialects, if you wish. So that is, when testing is done, that's part of it. My question to you, James, is, are you asking, with regards to translations for what? For language guides or for outreach materials, or what were you thinking?
I think more generally, because it ends up becoming a cost issue, I think at a minimum, to the extent that there's in-person outreach and in-person enumerators, we need to make sure that whatever instructions are orally communicated in assisting people to fill out the census survey, that the dialectical differences are accounted for at that level.
Okay, I'm just asking because those are very different recommendations, between written materials and and who's hired as a enumerator. So, yeah.
No, absolutely, and it's one of the issues that comes up just in the context of American Indian Native languages generally. Many of them are not widely used in written form, so this definitely is much more of a recommendation for oral communications.
Thank you.
It sounds like we should edit that recommendation to clarify. Great.
Okay, so right now I've just added dialectical differences. So the Census Bureau should account for dialectical differences in outreach. Do we want to be more specific than that in outreach and partnerships? I'm not sure what we want to, in field efforts, in outreach and field testing efforts.
I think outreach is broad enough where you capture a diverse, amount of engagement that the census does.
That's great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I see none. Ready to vote? Yes, sorry.
So I have a question. I'm unclear now. Are we adding something about this is emphasizing oral communication? Is that going to be in the language,
Yep. We clarified, James, by just using the word outreach. We did not use the word oral. What's your preference?
I would probably say outreach and enumeration, and in-person enumeration. I think that'll make it implicit, at least, that in most instances we're talking about oral communications, not written.
And this is John. I would agree with that. Adding in-person enumeration adds the oral component, but I would like the broad outreach because there are certain written materials that you might want to localize, so that having both is useful.
Do we want to vote on it as it stands now?
Yeah,
I'll read it one more time.
Would you read it, please? Thank you.
The NAC recommends that within language groups, the Census Bureau should account for dialectical differences in outreach and enumeration.
James, that work for you?
Yes, yeah, that's perfect.
I see no other cards up. Ready to vote? All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you for that. These are not numbered, so I'm going to continue to read them since it's maybe hard to reference them. So the next recommendation under the language is, because there has been little broadband penetration into AIAN communities on tribal lands, a 2011, in parens, FCC study estimated it at just under 10%, close parens. The NAC recommends that the Census Bureau conduct most of the outreach and enumeration efforts in more geographically isolated tribal areas through other means. Wherever feasible, direct in-person outreach and enumeration should be utilized through local tribal members who are fluent in English and the applicable local language and dialect. James, that was your recommendation. Any additional comments?
No, it just, again, this reflects a lot of what our experience has been over the last 10 years of trying to, bring jurisdictions into compliance with the language provisions at the local level in Alaska. And what we found is that using village, leaders who are bilingual in English in the appropriate dialect has proven to be the most effective. Actually, having in-person communications, very, very few people have access to internet to the extent that it may be available in some places. Oftentimes, it's limited to the tribal council buildings. And again, it's just not something that's really going to reach most of the people in particular villages.
Thank you. I especially appreciate this recommendation. It's too real for us. When we talk about no infrastructure, we talk about everything from water, sewer, roads, and including broadband. So I think this is important. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Yes.
So one thing is to try and do this more in person versus broadband. But I think there's like two recommendations in one. Like the second one, direct in-person outreach and enumeration should be utilized through local tribal members who are fluent in English and the applicable language. It seems to me like they're two separate issues.
James, would you mind if we split this into two recommendations? I think the second one starts with a sentence that begins, wherever feasible. Did I capture that right, Ali Sue?
Yeah, but also, is that not being done? Is that not how Census is doing it? It seems to me like it's the natural thing to go to those who are in a position of authority in the community and are fluent in English. I don't know.
I
think the answer is that it is being done. It's just not being done as much as we would like to see.
Okay.
And oftentimes, again, it's a limitation. This is actually a very, very difficult thing to do. It's easy to say, use local people, but this is something that we've experienced that it can be very challenging to get those local individuals in each individual village that's capable of speaking the local dialect to be able to do this. So I think what we're really trying to do is we're trying to encourage that there be more of that. We're not really saying that it hasn't been done, just that it hasn't been done enough. And I think that's reflected ultimately in some of the challenges that we've seen in terms of undercounts, in especially the geographically isolated regions.
Okay, I was just simply slightly surprised because it's like survey research 101. You go to community authorities, right? It's the first step you do when you come to a new place, and so. But that's fine. I have no issues.
I would just add one more comment, which is at least locally, we know that in 2010, Census had boots on the ground, and it helped our count. We are uncertain about the federal budget, and uncertain in large part because there is a focus on internet. And so I think this just adds emphasis to the idea that there are communities who really, if you're going to count them, you really do need to have boots on the ground. I think this is helpful in the federal budget process. That's my 2 cents. Jerry?
I don't know that I would separate these two. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Alice Sue, that it seems like two completely different things, but the second part of that is kind of, it expands on, gives something actionable to the first. And so I don't know, I would leave them together. I'd leave them together.
And maybe just to explain what my intent was really to use that as, I guess I should just explain real quick. The thing that tends to be most ineffective in terms of reaching AIN community is mail and internet, because both do not have the kind of, there are also cultural reasons in addition to other language reasons, the geographical reasons. And so I was just trying to indicate by that last sentence that in-person communication with someone who's actually capable of being bilingual in English in the covered dialect is going to be the single most effective way of reaching this population.
So I'm hearing let's keep this as one recommendation. Any objection? Great. Any further comment? Question? I see none. Ready to vote. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Great. Thank you for your support on that. James, you're on a roll, but I will read the next recommendation. I will not read what is the explanation underneath. The next recommendation is the NAC recommends that the Census Bureau should work with local translation panels to ensure that complete, accurate, and uniform information and instructions are provided by enumerators. Where feasible, a written translation that local translators/translation panels have determined is understandable to those in their community should be provided to the enumerator to be read to each LEP respondent. James, do you want to add any explanation?
Just that this also, I mean, the other issue that comes up again most frequently with the American Indian Alaska Native language group is that many of the spoken languages are in written form. They're all in written form for the most part. They're not just all widely used in written form. And so this is really to promote the fact that even where you're having oral communications, you don't want to place, and Census just as other federal government bodies do a very good job of recruiting people who are very capable translators, but we've also found that it's inherently difficult and unfair for the person who's translating to have to do everything on the spot. So this is really to kind of promote the fact that we want to be able to give them the tools in advance, so that they can, they basically can have the instructions already translated into the language that they could just simply read to the individual to make sure that every single person who is being enumerated is getting exactly the same translation and the same instructions.
Thank you. Comments or questions for James? I see none. Thumbs up. Ready to vote. All in favor? Aye. Great. Thank you. I see no opposition. James, for all your good comments. That moves us on to the last one in this category, unless there's something we haven't captured. Also from James, the NAC recommends that an outreach brochure be translated in writing for those AIAN languages that are written. The brochure should explain in concise terms the importance of participating in the census and provide a blank for the person within the community who are conducting outreach to provide their name and contact information. I think this is self-explanatory. Yes.
How does this differ from the one we just voted on as far as taking in, I guess it says dialectical differences in outreach and enumeration? How is this different?
Yeah, this is actually talking specifically about an outreach brochure, and the intent would be, the reality is for most American Indian and Alaska Native languages, there probably will not be a written brochure, but for more widely spoken languages where there is a very commonly used written form, such as Navajo, Yupik, probably Inupiaq, and a handful of others, you may be talking about 4 or 5 major Native language groups. It would be helpful to have at least a simple brochure, not as comprehensive as other outreach materials that may be prepared for others, but at least to have the basic brochure explaining what the importance of the census is, and also to have a blank space so that that area, that village, or that tribe can identify who specifically or which individuals are the points of contact if that person has needs more information.
Carol, this is Jerry, James. because earlier you said that, that many of the AIAN languages most have written form, but they're not necessarily commonly used. The way this is phrased would have Census held responsible for even those languages where the written is not commonly used, having to put something in writing. I mean, that's making me feel uneasy about what we're asking. And I think I agree with Luke. It just feels like it's part of that first one where we talked about outreach.
So James, we're going up to the previous one and making some adjustments, thinking maybe we can accommodate it in the previous recommendation.
Okay, yeah,
think-
and that's completely
Is that what
fine. The point was really to make clear that for all native languages, ideally we should have written information that can be read for instructions, but for certain languages it may be, and your point's very well taken. We really are talking about a handful of the American Indian languages that we would want to have some form of written brochure.
Hi, Jim. This is Terry. I have a suggested edit to what you have written and just wanted to see how you felt about it. We have the NAC recommends that an outreach brochure be translated in writing for common written AIAN languages. That hopefully can address some of the concerns that have been raised around the expansiveness and is more targeted, I think, to what you were trying to get at. Does that work, or do you want to try to incorporate it into the recommendation above?
I think that's fine. Could you possibly put the language back up on the screen?
It is on the screen.
It is the one you had before?
Oh, no, the language that you've edited. I just can't see it right now.
It's in italics in the bracket. It should be on the screen. Can you see that? Right here?
Yes, yeah.
Does that work? Right there?
I would probably just rephrase it to say written AIA languages that are commonly used, just to make clear that that's really what we're talking about.
Written AIN languages that are commonly used.
Does this address your concern, Jerry? This language? This clarification? Great. Thank you for the edit. Any further comments or questions? I see none. We're ready to vote. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Great. I think we've completed this category. This moves us on to the 2020 Census operational readiness. And again, if you don't see your recommendation under this category as we proceed, please do let us know in case we just missed it. I'm going to make a suggestion. The first three are from Deedus, and she's not in the room. I do expect her back so that she could facilitate this. So I'd like to skip over the ones that Deedus made for now. If she doesn't come here shortly, we'll come back to them. But I would like to move to recommendation number 4, made by, Arturo. Yes, he's here. Great. Everybody following me? All right. Recommendation number 4 reads as follows. Provide training/support to outreach messengers in addition to populations. Your randomness was probably named Carol. You're going to spot some of those as I tried to capture what people said. Anything around this, Arturo, that you want to capture? I just heard you talking about it yesterday.
This was about making sure that the support sort of got down to the local level, I think. But we can move that into the IPC
I think,
working group.
if I remember this comment, you were talking about having the trusted messengers need to be able to assure protections.
Right,
And if it's not communicated to the
I have something
messengers,
later
they can't.
here
So do you want to take this one off
Yeah,
and
just
go with
take
the
this
one that
one
you
off.
wrote? Okay.
Skip this.
Perfect.
All right. Then that moves us on to number 5 from Ali Sue, that the integrated communications campaign work with immigrant communities to get out the message that responding early by web or mail to the 2020 census will prevent in-person visits from enumerators. I'm not sure where that. Yep. Comments or questions, Arturo? No comments, no questions?
So sorry. Go ahead, go ahead.
That language, I'm not satisfied with the way that it's stated. I don't get the essence of what's intended here.
Yeah, we know that there's fear in the immigrant community about government people knocking on their door right now because of immigration issues. So, you know, we could, if the communications campaign makes it clear that the first steps, responding, you know, when you get the letter, either by mail or calling the number or answering on the web, all those things get you, you know, having done, you completed what you need to do and nobody's gonna come to your home. We think, you know, I think that's.
I think that's a little bit maybe misinterpreted because a lot of people in the immigrant community are not home during the day. But there's also what we found is that in terms of being able to answer the questionnaire, they use the library resources a lot in order to do that. And at least in New Jersey, the libraries have cut back hours. So there's less opportunity for them to go to the libraries and use the computers. Having said that, unless we are partnering with these libraries to maybe extend their hours during that particular
Well, the partnerships
time.
with community organizations, you know, the community organizations also have access, you know,
If I could-
computers and they can set up.
Interject. I think the goal of this, Alisu, is to tell people, if you don't want anybody knocking on your door, answer the form.
Right.
As a strategy, and it's a strategy we used in 2010. If you don't want to be bothered by enumerators, fill out your form, return it, and you're done.
And I think it more, you know, more so now with the current climate, it's a good message.
I would just state it differently then.
Well, and
Okay.
perhaps it should say that the integrated communication campaign, anyway, that this strategy be considered, not do it this way. You see what it sounds like? You picked a strategy, you say, use this, as opposed to, you know, consider it. You might want to say it was used in 2010, I don't know.
I think work with immigrant communities to get out the message. I mean, that's already, but I'm, okay, if you.
I want them to tell people to do it online so that they don't have people come. So I'm perfectly comfortable recommending that as a do that. And so I think that we should maybe try voting on it that way. And if people don't want it to say that, I mean, we've got people very fearful of having someone from the government come to their home. We want to relay to them that if they do it online, then people aren't going to be coming to your home. That
Online
seems
or
pretty
mail
basic.
or call by
Mail,
phone, you
like do
know?
it,
But
yeah.
Do you want to say prioritize then? I mean, I don't know. Is it a matter of we want that to be the initial message, or I don't know.
State it in a more friendly fashion. You know, that doesn't.
But it doesn't say do this. It just says work with immigrant communities to get the message out. I mean, I think it's couched in. But I mean, if somebody can come up with a
No, but I think
more
frankly,
palatable.
this is what the contractors are asking us for are recommendations for what messages would work with communities to respond to current issues. I think it's actually, I don't think it needs to be friendly because, or friendlier, because I think this is what they're asking us to do.
I noticed, thank you, Julie, for adding the narrative in italics. I think that's helpful. Would you mind reading it out loud?
Okay, we have an italics underneath it now. This will help address fears immigrants may have of having people come to their home. This is similar to the messaging used in 2010 census.
Does that help the NAC?
You want to change people to government officials, government agents?
So I have a question, procedural question. When we vote on recommendations, does the italics piece go with it or not? And if it's not going with it, I'm not sure why we'd leave it there.
It's my understanding it would be included. Yeah.
Can I offer a minor amendment? Instead of say will prevent, will minimize in-person visits, because depending on how the answer forms, right, there still may be a person that will need to come up and follow up. So we don't want to get out the message that it will prevent it altogether, is that it won't.
Right. Ali Sue, is that all right with you? Yeah.
Or we could say, get out the message that responding completely or fully early by web will avoid in-person visits from enumerators.
Yeah, the
Avoid.
prevent felt sort of too.
Yes. I felt like that was a word in everyone's
Arturo,
mouth.
we'll probably still, on some occasions, no, we do re-interviews and things like that, and so.
I heard the word avoid. So just so we're all on the same page.
Are we okay with the minimizing the likelihood of in-person visits, or we want to avoid in there?
I think minimize is a safer way, because we don't want to come
Yeah,
across
okay.
saying we're avoiding, and
Okay,
then we're,
yeah. I like it.
lying. you
Okay,
know.
so the new language reads, the NAC recommends that the Integrated Partnerships and Communications Campaign work with immigrant communities to get out the message that responding fully early, sounds a little awkward in here, fully early by web or mail to the 2020 census will minimize the likelihood of in-person visits from enumerators. For some reason, fully and early together seems slightly awkward. Fully and early? Fully and early? Fully and completely, or completely and early? Responding completely and early?
You can say fully responding early, so
Okay.
put fully before responding.
Fully responding early? Okay, I like fully responding early. I've got that in there. Are we cool? Ready to vote?
Ready for a vote? Looks like everybody's comfortable. All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? I'm doing the aye and nay because I want you to have some action here. You've been sitting all morning, right? Okay. Then I would suggest we go back. We skipped over the 3 recommendations that Dita submitted. Now that she's back in the room, I would suggest we go back to recommendation number 1. And I will read this out loud. Census Bureau established a federal interagency work group on outreach modeled after the State of California State Agency Working Group on Outreach, which was effective in both Census 2000 and the 2010 census in creating millions of, in quotes, impressions on hard-to-count populations, as well as general, in quotes, awareness and motivation, close quotes, impressions on all constituencies. The U.S. Census Bureau could save dollars by leveraging already existing federal agency meeting vehicles in parens, newsletters, emails, web banners, social media, check mailings, pay stubs, etc. Build strong partnerships with federal agencies that use decennial and ACS data. Anything you want to add to that, Ditas, as the author?
apologize for not being short and concise, but I wanted to give them an example. And I didn't think you guys were going to vote on this. I'm fine with punting it to Megan's, but if you guys want to vote on it. Any questions? You guys hate it? You want to take anything out of it? Okay.
Looks like we're ready to vote. All those in favor, say aye. I'm sorry, John, did
No,
you
no,
have a
that's
comment
fine.
or question? I'm sorry.
I was only going to suggest that maybe we put the sentence on U.S. Census could save money by leveraging all of that into italics, because that's sort of more explanatory as to why we're making this recommendation. For that last sentence, the U.S. Census Bureau could save money by leveraging ... That is more of an explanation for the recommendation. So I was thinking put that in italics, as we are with other recommendations.
Yeah, we can make it short and just, yeah, because I add a lot of detail just so they understand. Okay, great.
Great. Thanks for that. Yes?
I sent 2 recommendations yesterday, but apparently they didn't make it there. And one of them is very consistent with what Dita is saying. But I would like to just add something about self-identification in there, you know, about the hard to count. What does it say? The hard to count populations to improve like self-identification, because that's one of the issues I'm trying to address.
We just pulled up what Huberto emailed that just came through. So we've got, are these then related? You're saying the ones that you just sent are related to this?
Yeah, the second one.
Give the high priority to outreach. Let's take it. You want to just take it and cut and paste it in there and we'll read it and use it, the second one. Did we vote?
We did not vote yet.
Okay. Is this related exactly to that one, or is it in this, area?
Or can we put it in the second one that comments about?
I didn't really read it yet. Just stick it underneath that for now, in between maybe.
So the second one is what I thought the working group should do, and it mentions the WIC stuff, but, you know, other stuff of more specificity. Or we could put it up in the one above.
I believe some of the language could be integrated to the one that you have instead of having 2 separate.
Did you want to read the second recommendation? And then we can maybe figure out which one to put it in?
Did we approve, or can we go ahead and approve Dita's first one then, and then move on, and then we move on to the second one and bring Huberto's in, or I'm unclear what we're doing.
I think we're trying to figure out if Gilberto's language fits better under number 1 or number 2. Is that correct? Yeah, yeah. So I'll read number 2 out loud, and maybe Gilberto, just so that we're all on the same page, could you say one more time, what is the language that you're trying to incorporate? So as I read number 2, we can all be thinking about where it should be placed.
Microphone.
To facilitate self-identification.
Okay.
As part of the whole communication and outreach that you are proposing there.
Okay. I'm going to read Dita's second recommendation. I should let her read. She's much faster than I am.
I can actually read it because it's far enough away.
That's great.
The Integrated Partnership and Communications Program through the Federal Interagency Working Group, the one that was created in Recommendation 1 on outreach, pursue interagency agreements with key federal programs that have a high-touch and high-trust interaction with hard-to-count populations. If the ICP would like to understand, okay, how the state, that's more of a italicized one. So the purpose of this one is through the Federal Agency Working Group to pursue interagency agreements with key federal programs that have high-touch, high-trust interaction with specific populations. We could probably add Gilberto's in there, because I didn't do a specific goal. I just said they have, you know, high touch with these populations. So obviously, maybe we could add with the goal of increasing participation and what Gilberto said. So I didn't do a goal with what they need to be doing, but you could put the goal of why you want of self-reporting. So it would be 2 goals, because I'd want them to self-report accurately, but I also want them to respond. So can we add something like that to recommendation 2? So where it says that have high-touch and high-trust interaction with hard-to-count populations, so that's where you want, for the purposes of achieving a complete and accurate count and increasing, Yolanda, what was it? Increasing self-reporting, and this is Gilberto's language. Self-identification? Okay. Did you guys get
Can I
that?
ask a clarifying question? So I think for Gilberto's recommendation, I think the question is it to give a high priority to outreach and communications generally with a specific, kind of focus on hard to count and reach groups, or is to give it a high priority to outreach and communications to hard to count groups? It's not entirely clear.
Oh, is the working group? That's what you're asking, is the.
No, for Gilberto's recommendation, where he says, give a high priority to outreach and communication/education to ensure higher levels of self-identification, right? It could be read either as, give a high priority across all the things the Census Bureau is considering, with a specific reason for getting a focus on hard to count, or is it a give a high priority to outreach and communications to hard to reach folks specifically? They're related, but not exactly the same.
The second version that you mentioned there would be more, would be closer to what I'm trying to say.
What's the second? You said the second one?
You want to read that? You did that so eloquently in terms of the differences. And I'm not opposed to any of that. I just didn't go that further step of identifying their goals.
Like that? You want to put that in there? Well, but his is a broad, it sounds like his recommendation is just a broad recommendation that a high priority should be given to this, versus if we incorporate it into Deedas's recommendation, it's very specific to what the federal interagency working group would be focusing on. So I think there's a question of whether you want to have a broad recommendation that would talk about a high priority, and it could also be incorporated into to yours as well.
So I'm thinking that this is just a separate from mine. Yeah?
Yeah, I would
Okay.
think that we can separate.
All right, so you would have 2 to vote on.
It's just that it didn't make it in yesterday when I sent it, so I wanted to fit it in.
So let's go back to number 1.
Yeah, so number 1, I think we voted on.
We did not vote on number 1.
We didn't? Okay.
No, we were ready to, but John pressed his microphone. So I think we were ready to vote on number 1. Let's just see if we can get that done. Recommendation number 1, which is to establish the Federal Interagency Working Group, reestablish it. As a reminder, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Number 1 is approved. Number 2, as reworded. Any further discussion? Anybody want this read out loud? You're good? All right, ready to vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, number 2 passes. Number 3, this is also yours, Deedus, if you want to just. Oh,
We go ahead and put on Gilberto's. We have his right before those, right underneath Deedas's, so that's Gilberto's there now. Do we want to go ahead and vote on that one as it stands and then move on to Deedas's third?
would you mind reading that one out loud, Gilberto's?
The NAC recommends that the Census Bureau give a high priority to outreach and communications/education to hard to count and reach groups to ensure higher levels of self-identification and participation in the 2020 census. And to improve, the self-identification is repeated there. Can we edit it out? In the 2020 census to improve awareness, we can say, just awareness about the importance of the census data. Let's just remove the self-identification repetition there, I think.
Great. All right, thank you. Any questions, comments? Ready to vote? All those,
Oh, wait, sorry. Grammatically, it should say education for hard to count.
Communications to education for, right.
I was just going to ask, is this not the mission of the Integrated Partnership and Communications Campaign already? Okay.
You want me to read this next one?
did we vote? I don't think we voted.
Oh, wait, I forgot.
All right, any further? Grammar, other? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Right, no opposed. All right, next one. And maybe just for clarification, we punted the work group recommendations back to the work group, but these actually came out of the presentation yesterday. So that's why we're going through this exercise for these recommendations, because they were related to the actual presentation yesterday.
Okay.
Thank you.
Recommendation, before awarding any contracts, Census Bureau should review their Census in Schools Scholastic program and their Statistics in Schools programs and share evaluation metrics with the NAC. It should be IPC, sorry. IPC should review the California, that could be just in italics, all the way down to the lesson plans. But I'm recommending, well, I guess I'm asking them to review what the California Standard Line lesson plans that we did in 2010 to figure out if they can use that. So I don't know if that should be, oh, you know what, so I guess we could go before awarding any contracts, the metrics with the NAC, and then I could probably add something like, and develop more locally tested school outreach programs. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, and then I just did that background for, you know, what we did that worked. Yeah, I mean, are you guys, so.
We award thousands of contracts.
Okay.
And a lot of them aren't related to education.
Okay. Oh, so are there contracts related to Census in Schools? Like, do you guys award a contract with Scholastic? Or should I say before engaging? Or, I mean, how do you guys, I wonder how they sign on to like, hey, we're going to do what we did last time. Or before making final decisions on school outreach materials? Yeah, final, okay. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and develop more locally tested school outreach programs. Yeah, let's do locally tested school curriculum-based outreach programs. Because, I mean, I think, you know, Census in Schools, yay, but I really want them to focus on getting it and leave the italicized, because that gives the detail of, and just, we're going to start doing that in California next January anyway, so.
I have a question. You started in January, and it was rolled out in when?
2010?
I mean, in terms of the school year.
So usually just like in 8th grade, they cover the actual standard of history and social science standard that covers the Constitution in California is usually in January and February each 8th grade year. And then in American government, they'll do like a census and redistricting when they cover, you know, so over the year they go over the book, right, the textbook. And we want to make sure we get all 8th graders that are studying the Constitution to understand the implications of the census.
Okay, we might have to put something in, because there may be regional differences. I would say September, you would have to roll it out in New Jersey.
Yeah, so I'm not putting any dates in here, so the recommendation is just to have them look at it, and it may come out with, there's going to be regional differences. They need to work closer with field. They need to, so my issue is they develop these national programs that don't take into account local schedules, right? So that's why I'm saying they should look at the evaluation and develop more locally tested school curriculum-based. So it's, instead of telling them when, It's make sure it works for the locals. But I want it to be curriculum-based.
John?
Minor edit is just, it has a parenthetical to see printed toolkit, and unless we're attaching a printed toolkit, we should just delete that.
I can attach a printed toolkit.
I don't know how this format, whichever way, we should just make it consistent.
Here it is.
And Ditas, did you partner with the ABA, law-related education?
So we work directly with the superintendent of public instruction for the entire state, and he supported it. And then we worked directly with the people who developed the curriculum standards at each county, because they implement. So it's right there with the teachers. And actually, the locals developed it.
Okay, I'm going to try to move us along. We have 3 more under this category, and we have just under 10 on the NCT, so I want to get us moving. We've got about 50 minutes left. Any other questions or comments on Dita's recommendation? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? That's great. Thank you, Ditas, for those recommendations. So we have 3 more. I'm going to move to item number 4. In the same category, Arturo, this has your name attached to it.
We got rid of that. I thought
We already did that. Number 5, thank you.
We did it. We approved it.
And we did 5?
Yeah, we're on 6 now.
We're on number 6.
We're on number 6, and this is mine. This is mine.
Great.
And this had to do with, excuse me, making sure that the communication strategy is relevant to the environment in which the census is going to be conducted, so that it takes into account current events and the current environment that we'll be dealing with.
Yes, Hassan.
Strongly support of the recommendation.
Thank you, Hassan.
Great. Other comments?
This is a heck of a way to do business here. I'm trying to keep track of it all. That sounds a lot like something we've already approved, and I'm trying to find it here. And maybe it is all right, so we've got something about outreach and dialects. Does it sound like something we approved? Does it ring a bell to anybody else that we already? We took which one off?
The one that sounded like this, that said trust.
Oh.
Because we were getting to this. I was saying, I think that we took that one off. There was another one that talked about messengers, and we took that one off because it was like Carol's version of what Arturo had submitted. No?
So if there's a duplicate, I mean, does it matter? Will they tell us, hey, that's duplicated when we submit it? I'm just sort of like, if we're, you know what I mean? Like, unless it's a bad duplicate, like.
We're going to rain recommendations down
Yeah, it's
on
kind of
them.
like Luca, like, give them a lot and let them sort it out. No. Here's all the addresses. I've given you 15 times.
I stand corrected.
I think we did have a light conversation about that under the AI-AN context, but I think it was specific to that population too.
And also to 9/11.
Any other?
Yeah.
You good with that?
I'm through.
Okay, so we may have duplicates. I think Census will let us know if we do. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Great, thank you. Moves us on to number 7. All right, eliminate number 7. Okay, thank you for that. We have 1 under tribal consultation briefing. That came from you, Arturo? No, it didn't. Does anyone want to own this one? Okay. Great. You want to eliminate that one?
we're on the tribal consultation briefing. The question about pursuing the enrollment question seemed to come up multiple times, and so this was a way to try to capture that, the question of capturing the cost of pursuing the enrollment question.
I think, just, I guess, to hopefully draw some support, I mean, I think it's important that a lot of us acknowledge and realize that the Bureau's response, that they're going to carry on with it, you know, in the testing phase, because they already started it, even though there was widespread, you know, resistance in the communities and from tribal leaders. And so I guess it would be good to know, you know, what was spent on that enrollment question, because I know we're in a really, you know, tight fiscal environment, and, you know, there are things that aren't going to be done.
You should also ask what it would have cost to take it out of the test.
Exactly, thank
Because it
you.
would have cost more to take it out.
Great. I mean, that, all of that I think is important. Thank you.
I think we had a related, just general topic in the first part of our meeting that might also cover that. It's not as specific, but we talked about those incremental costs. So just as an aside.
So this was Kirsten's. Are you pushing it forward? Do you want to edit it? Does somebody want to edit it?
It was a question that came up. I'm fine if, moving on, we have 2 more pages to get through in 45 minutes. So I'm fine moving on.
Do we want to strike it then?
Yes, that's fine with me to strike it.
Well, if she strikes it, then I would like to introduce it. I mean, I think.
So can you write up something that's, do you want to introduce it just like that, or do you want to write it something that's more specific, concise, and actionable?
Well, how much more
Well, I
concise
mean,
can it be?
I guess
okay.
also taking into consideration what Director Thompson said too, what it would cost to have taken it out. I mean, just that type of transparency with regard to this question, because it did come up over the course of our meeting several times by not just the Native American contingent.
Okay, so you want to add, census should budget the incremental cost of pursuing the enrollment questions or taking it out, and taking it out. Is that I'm just trying to edit down for these guys.
Should budget, I don't know if it's budget, but what's the word?
It might be easier just to say incremental cost of pursuing or abandoning.
Or taking, and taking.
The budget part, Terry and I are noting, is kind of weird. Should evaluate the incremental costs or something like that. It's budget as if you're asking them to budget it. Do you know what, it just sounds kind of strange. So we want to say should evaluate. What is it we want? Do we want them to evaluate and then report back a cost benefit analysis? I'm not clear what we're asking for. No, I'm asking the people proposing it.
Some sort of, you know, just a statement or something short to us that acknowledges the, you know, what it would have cost either way. It goes to that concept of transparency. And I say this too with respect to the Bureau, but I think we really need to think about the fact that we're no longer testing on reservations. You know, that was a fiscal constraint that we've had to, that was preventing that at this time. And so, I think this recommendation is necessary.
Since we added or abandoning, which is a good addition, we can take out the versus taking them out at the very end. And that's the cleanest.
So are we done drafting? So again, if you guys have stuff that you're looking at, like draft it so very few edits on the fly have to, because that's what takes the time, is to when we don't have a fully drafted.
Isn't that the point of right now?
Any further comments? Hearing none. going to take a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're going to move on.
Hey, Judith, can you hear me? Barry Spenner.
Was that Randy or James, or who was that? I'm
James?
sorry.
Can anyone hear me?
Answer him. Did you answer?
We can hear you.
Hey, Judith, can you hear me? Barry Spenner.
Is that you, Barry?
You're going to speak up just a little bit. We'll turn off our
It's Barry
mics.
Spenner.
Yes.
Barry. C-A-R-Y. Okay. I apologize for this, but I got kicked off the call and couldn't easily get back on. Yeah. Look, I apologize for doing this, but I was kicked off the call and difficult to get back in. If we go back to what I think is number 6, I had an amendment I want to offer.
Is that what the one related to recommends the communication strategy needs to be tailored? That one? Okay, go ahead.
If we go back to what I think is number 6.
Is that recommendation 6, the one that says the NAC recommends the communication strategy needs to be tailored? That one?
Say it again, please. I had a little trouble hearing you, so just repeat what you said, please. Yes, the number 6, the NAC recommends the communication strategy, etc.
Okay, go ahead.
I would like to amend it to say that the NAC asks the Census Bureau to give it a report on how it plans to allay fears among some minority groups that census data will be used against persons
So
who
let me
may
just,
be at risk
so you
for
want,
deportation or other serious consequences. Period. That's what I'm sorry. The report should be made to the NAC either through a virtual meeting or at our fall meeting. Period.
so you're saying, let me see if I can get this. So the NAC recommends that the communication strategy needs to be tailored to the current and evolving environment affecting public trust in contact with federal agency employees, and produce a report to the NAC about their strategies to alleviate fears that data will be used against responding communities. Does that make sense? Did I capture it?
Yes, that's it. Just by way of explanation, as Arturo has made quite clear, and more eloquently than I can, the largest hurdle that the Census Bureau is going to face for the 2020 census is that there are large numbers of people, particularly in the Arab Muslim population and in the Hispanic population, who are fearful that any contact with federal government or any government official could lead to their deportation from the country. And that fear is not paranoia. It's well founded.
Okay, so we're just editing right now because we have the target audiences that needs to go somewhere. Let's see. So yeah, we could probably take the report and just make it a separate sentence and an action item kind of. Yeah, that way we don't have to. Does that capture it for you, Barry? Can you see that or no?
I'm sorry, I I don't see anything.
Okay, so you want me to read it? I can read it to you.
Yeah, please, read it, please.
Okay, so recommendation number 6 is the NAC recommends that the communication strategy needs to be tailored to the current and evolving environment affecting public trust in contact with federal agency employees, and the targeted audiences should include the trusted messengers, historically undercounted communities, as well as the public at large. The NAC further recommends that the Census Bureau produce a report to the NAC on how the communication strategy will alleviate fears that data will be used against responding communities. Will not be used? Wait, will alleviate fears? No, it is, you're alleviating fears that it'll be used against them. Yeah. That will alleviate fears that data might be used against responding communities. I think.
Yes, that is fine.
Okay, I think we captured, I get what you're trying to say. So do you want to call for another vote?
You did. It's language just great.
We're going to re-vote on item number 6 with these amendments. Any questions before we start?
Just
Yes,
would a
Megan.
presentation be adequate, or are we asking for a written report, which would take a lot more time and investment on the behalf of the Bureau? I'm fine with either, I'm just asking what we're asking for.
How about report back, which could be writing or verbal?
That's fine by me.
We're good?
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Barry, that good with you? Report back?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Let's vote. All those in favor say aye. Great. Any opposed? Great. Then we move on. Thank you, Barry.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to move us on to the last page, which is under the 2015 NCT report. All the previous recommendations are referred back to the working groups. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the recommendations in order, and if they don't have a name and nobody owns them, I'm going to skip over them and then come back just for sake of time, so we can acknowledge those that drafted them. So the first recommendation is you, Anne. The NAC supports the Bureau's selection of an optimal design for the 2020 census race.
And we voted on that.
Did we vote on that?
Yeah. That's why it says approved. We voted on it earlier.
Oh, during the committee. Okay, it's not showing up on my written, so.
Oh, okay,
Sorry.
right. But the three.
And I was verifying all of this when you guys were doing your thing. All right. Is the next one approved as well?
No.
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 All
So-
right, then the next one. Go ahead, Ann.
So I was just going to say, to make things quicker for people, so the next 4 recommendations are mine, and basically what they all are recommendations basically that the census do some additional analyses or go back to some of the data from the 2015 National Content Test and just sort of pull out a few things. That's all it is, just recommendations or considerations. I can talk about them very quickly. The first one, the NAC recommends that the Census Bureau analyze and report on the data collected on the fluidity and external classification of race as part of the NCT. So basically, there are some questions they ask people about whether the race labels that they chose for themselves were the ones that they always use sometimes, and so forth. They also asked if people were ever taken by others to be members of other races. And so this first recommendation is simply requesting that the Bureau provide some of the information that was gathered or make accessible some of those results. So that's the spirit of that first one.
So I'm not a, PhD. So why would we do this, and what kind of findings would come out of it to assist in the 2020 census? I'm just,
So the reason that I'm recommending it, so there's kind of a shorter term, researchers who do stuff related to race and ethnicity data would love to have this information. But second also, I think for the Bureau itself, in the longer term, that it will be useful, be instructive to get a sense of how unstable these categories are. There's already research that's been done here using, by Census Bureau researchers, looking at the fluidity, people moving in and out of categories. And I think that this is kind of a longer term question that it's that the Census Bureau community will also want to understand better. So it's not directly related to something needed for 2020. So it's not a more programmatic thing in the immediate term, but.
Questions on this one? If not, what I'm going to ask Ann to do is go through all four, and then maybe we can take them on as a group unless someone wants to pull one out for further discussion. So if you'd move on, Ann.
Sure. The next one, the NAC encourages the Bureau to analyze the NCT data to better understand why multiple race reporting has relatively low consistency rates. So a piece of information that came out of the NCT is that while generally people are pretty consistent in saying they are Asian on the form and Asian when re-interviewed, or white on the form and white when re-interviewed, that wasn't true for people who were reporting multiple races. It was much less. And so again, in the spirit of thinking forward with how we use this data, collect these data that have a lot of instability, a lot of inconsistency, this is just a recommendation for further analysis, looking more into the issue of trying to get some sense of why people might have given such unstable responses.
So would that be more like re-interview, or I'm just curious of, okay.
So this was a finding that that came out of, it had to do with the discrepancy between what people write on the form, what they say when they were called back in the re-interview. And the recommendation is not to collect new data, to go back and analyze, dig in a little bit deeper in the data they already collected. If there are no questions, I'll go to the next of my recommendations, which is simply, and I think this may be something also that Morad is recommending later, but just sort of suggesting that that the Census Bureau, that we encourage them, or we support the classification we saw that they came up with of 19 ethnicities for their MENA working classification, as well as 11 pan-ethnic types of identifiers. That basically that we say, you had this working classification, looks good, we recommend you keep using that moving forward, based again on the results of the 2015 NCT. And then finally, the last recommendation has to do with, again, digging more into their data about what happens when people take the census on small devices like phones and iPads, as opposed to taking them on laptops and desktops. There seemed to be the 2015 NCT showed there were some differences in the results they got on things like non-response, detailed reporting multiple options. So again, this is just, encouraging a dive into what might be driving some of those differences. So these are all pretty much technocratic suggestions about going back into the data to flesh some things out more that I think will be of real relevance going forward. But they're not programmatic 2020 type of burning issues.
So when you say the one about the MENA and used in 2015, is that because they're going to do something in 2017 or 2018 that's going to be different, or how does that sort of differ from the overall how we adopted the whole NCT?
Oh, sure. So the recommendation that I made before that we did vote on and approve this morning, so that was just saying that the Census Bureau has identified their optimal question strategy. There should be a MENA checkbox. It should be a combined question and so forth. And so I just wanted us to get behind them and support that and say, yes, you've identified this as optimal. We support that selection of this as the optimal strategy. So that had to do with how we think the question should look when it's submitted to Congress in 2018, and to basically support the census conclusion in that report. And these recommendations instead are ones where I'm suggesting that we encourage the Census Bureau to analyze further data they've collected, to understand better some of the ways in which different question formats work, or not even just question formats, but some of, I don't even want to say problems, but some of the more subtle things that have come out of that report. Again, things like, multiple race reporting, not so stable, not so consistent. Can we understand better what's going on? So that's what these recommendations are about.
Okay, well, do we think that they're going to change? So it says encourage the Census Bureau to adopt the MENA working classification used as its established classification for going forward? We think it's going to change? Is there an indication that it's going to get rid of, or?
No, it's just that since it's called a working classification, it has something of the air of being possibly transitional, or, it's in kind of interim piece. And so it's just a suggestion that based on what you have now shown us from the 2015 results, it looks like this is a classification to adopt in a more established way going forward, to not just treat it as the temporary provisional working classification.
Could I ask, though, could I ask a quick question? But with the OMB standards being looked at, if they come up with a slightly different definition, would that be problematic? I don't know if that's part of the reason why it's still a working classification rather than an actual, complete definition, but just wanted to flag that might be an issue.
Yeah, my guess is that the OMB, if it makes changes on the score, it's not going to involve a laundry list of, Iraqi is MENA and Turkish is not MENA, because if we look at their current definitions for their groupings, the OMB groups, white, black, and so forth, they don't give us lists of countries. They say, white is any member of the original peoples of Europe, Middle East, or North Africa. So the OMB is, I'm guessing, is not going to do something that's going to be so specific and detailed that it would give the Census Bureau guidance about this working classification.
Well, but I thought the Federal Register notice had questions specifically about the definition of MENA and which groups should go in and which groups should not be in. And I just don't, I know it has to be done in concert, so just want to be mindful of that.
Okay. It'd be fine with me to drop it if we're worried that it might run into some conflict.
I mean, it's an encourage, right? Because it's a working classification and it's based in 2015. Do we need to have this right now?
No, we don't. It's entirely at the pleasure of the committee, and I'm totally fine to retract it or whatever you do.
Well, can we
in these
just
cases.
table this till
Of
another
course.
time? Because
Of
perhaps OMB is going to, things might change, so.
Sure.
Okay.
So we're just tabling the MENA recommendation, is that correct? So we have 3 others that Ann has presented. Any more questions for Ann about the 3 that are left standing? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Lacking enthusiasm. Aye. Any opposed? All right. I think we're on to the recommendation made by Stuart. I can read it out loud if you'd like. Census convene a working group to study the addition of sexual and gender identity questions to the American Community Survey. Would you like to speak to that, Stuart?
Yeah, just a couple things, and I'm going to make a friendly amendment to my own proposal. But basically, I just want to say that I think that it's a total surprise to me that we've come as far as we have, and it's been an incredible, eye-opening experience to be here for a few years and to feel the openness and interest on the part of the members of the NAC and the Census Bureau to investigating this. Plus, there's been a huge change in society, but also in the beginnings of, basically the research on these questions and the use of these questions on surveys has come a long, long way. But we also understand that there's a limitation and there's certain things that can be achieved in terms of the use of the American Community Survey in particular. And unfortunately, we got very, very close to having this as a topic of real discussion, but I still think it's worth registering that this is an issue that will come, that I have no doubt that at some point we will arrive and it's on the agenda. So I think it just seemed worth, in the context of the discussions that we've had and the events that have gone on, that we should put this. I think it's been sort of proposed before.
And you mean a working group of the NAC, not like an interagency working group?
No. We're talking, I'm talking about, it's really, yeah, okay. Yes. And I was going to say that this really should probably read, the Census convene a working group to study and make recommendations on the addition of sexual and gender identity questions to the American Community Survey. I'm taking this as a proposal that this is something that we recommend. It's obviously something that the director and the Bureau can decide, and in the context and the scheme of things that they're faced with, but I just feel like I wanted to bring that up and see how we stand on that.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Stuart? I see none. Smart move. Ready for a vote. All those in favor say aye. With enthusiasm. Any opposed? Great. Thank you. The next recommendation doesn't have an author, but I will read it. Own it if you will, please. Recommend that MENA category should be treated the same as the Hispanic category. Does this belong to anyone in the room? Yes, Hassan.
Yeah, it's actually what follows next is an explanation. So, there are a lot of similarities between the makeup of Arab Americans and the makeup of Hispanic communities. They come, Arab Americans, from different racial backgrounds, and maybe the more appropriate approach to capturing this population is the ethnicity label. So I guess the recommendation is to, in looking at the MENA, the Hispanic example is the closest in terms of the makeup of this community.
I think that something we need to think about is the fact that they haven't fully figured out, I mean, they're going to tabulate, right, maximums, minimums, et cetera, for each group, but Hispanic isn't, if the combined question goes forward, isn't a separate thing right now. It will be combined in with everything else. And so if we mean specifically that you want, just for clarification here, I'm not saying yes or no or what I think about, but just for clarification, if you want it to be treated as an ethnic origin where racial tabulations are made underneath. Is that what you're saying? Similar to how Hispanic was treated? Because Hispanic now is going to be in there with everything else as a category or grouping, you know, like a not necessarily singled out as different. So when you say treated as the Hispanic category, it's going to be treated like everything else at this point. I mean, all of the groups are going to be presented as everyone who checked black, as I understand it, everyone who checked black only in the different combinations, and Hispanic's going to be presented the same way as what they're talking about now. Everyone who said Hispanic, including with something else, and Hispanic only. And so Hispanic isn't going to be in a different way. Does that make sense?
It does, and all what we are asking is to be treated similar to the treatment of the Hispanic community.
So your suggestion is that MENA be an ethnic category, like an ethnicity as opposed to race?
Yes. And in terms of tabulations, we don't know.
So I'm confused, but because I think the combined question format, does it say, and I'd have to look at it again, race or ethnicity on top? So you are being treated the same, and it's not pulling it out. So I guess you're saying if OMB blows NCT out of the water, then you would like to consider and keeps the question from 2000, you'd like to try to treat it the way Hispanic is treated in the 2010 format? Okay.
And
if we end up with a combined race and ethnicity, then it's a mute question for us. I mean,
You worded it, is that what you are recommending? That is, recommend that MENA category should be considered an ethnicity and not a race? Is that what you are trying to put forward?
I think that would be a more accurate recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the standpoint of our communities, making it into a racial classification could be problematic. I think it will split our communities apart and really lose a lot of support of the MENA category. if it becomes racialized.
Additional comments? So it's been re-edited to read, the NAC recommends the MENA category should be considered an ethnicity and not a race. Okay, everyone ready to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm going to enter an
gonna
abstention on
abstain.
this one.
Me too, 'cause I don't
because
really
I
understand
kind
it.
of don't agree, but I want them to do what they want to do, but I feel sort of like we're not really specifying any of these groups or races or ethnicity. We're just kind of calling them groups now. And like, a similar could be said of the category Latino Hispanic, right? Because
So
like,
make no mistake, if OMB makes MENA a minimum reporting category, they are saying it is a new race category.
yes,
That's what OMB is looking at. So if they say it's a minimum reporting category, it's going to be under race, and it's going to be a new race category, just so you understand what they're doing, okay? And I'm not advocating pro or against OMB, I'm just telling you what is in that Federal Register notice and what they're looking at doing.
John, but isn't Hispanic a minimum reporting group? Isn't Hispanic?
That's true.
And it is not a race.
It's not a race.
And the Federal
You're exactly
Registry
right.
also asked the question whether it should be
Right.
ethnicity or a race.
I spoke too soon. OMB is going to provide guidance, though, on what to do if it's an ethnicity or if it's a race. That's really what I meant to say, is they're going to provide that guidance.
Right, and so
you
what we
can't-
want
And
to,
the Census Bureau can't make that determination. So what we will do, though, what we will do is once OMB makes their determination, like I said, there is a lot of time for us to figure out how to tabulate the data in ways that everybody's going to be happy with. And that's what we've committed to. But the first thing we need is OMB needs to make their determination in terms of is it an ethnicity, is it a race, or is it not, anything. And then we will take it from there and we will go forward in the best way to tabulate that information, okay?
Right.
We really need them to,
So I think one of the questions then would be whether this recommendation really has any weight, since it's not in the Census Bureau's hand. And I wonder if the recommendation should be more, the NAC recommends that the MENA category should be an option regardless of how OMB rules, right? I think there was discussion around what happens if, and there might be a recommendation on it later, but that seems like that might be a more salient recommendation, to say that regardless of where OMB lands, we believe the Census Bureau should, because it can do more than the minimum, that the Census Bureau should include a MENA response in the 2020 census regardless.
I would support something like what Terry just articulated, because it does sound like deciding whether it's a race ethnicity isn't even within the scope of what the Bureau can do, for what the director just said.
Hassan, yes?
Second.
Red? Great.
Do we want to change this then to say that regardless of the outcome of the OMB, we would like to recommend that the Census Bureau collect MENA data, basically? Okay? Is that, and then we want to re-vote on that one?
Everybody comfortable with that? Yes. Thanks for that good edit. Everybody in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, my list stops at page 4 of 5. I have no 5. So if there are others, I don't have that page. Are there others?
There's just one left.
Is there one left?
Right. And it should be,
It's this one here, the resident census treat MENA as one region?
right, that should be the last one.
Someone can read that out loud, since I can't see it
Sure,
from here.
I'll read that.
Great, thanks, John.
Recommend census treat MENA as one region instead of two with sub-boxes assigned to largest groups by population in the U.S. Parentheses, Lebanese, Iranian, Egyptian, Syrian, Iraqi, and Israeli, end parentheses, while using examples to include transnational groups, Gulf and other African populations.
Let me provide an edit to that. I think it should read, first sentence, the NCT treats MENA as two separate regions, and then the recommendation would be for Census to treat MENA as one region with sub-boxes assigned to the largest groups. Data.
Can you repeat that for your editors over here?
Yeah, so we could say the first sentence could be NCT treats MENA as two separate regions, and then the second sentence would be NAC recommends Census treat MENA as one region with sub-boxes assigned to the largest groups by populations in the U.S., and then the rest is the same. Under transnationals, to give us an example, you could put Kurds in parentheses.
Murad, would you accept as a friendly amendment, though, breaking that into two? Because I really see it as two proposals. One is about what the checkboxes should look like, and one is about what the examples should include. Would it be okay to split them and consider them separately?
Sure.
Is it okay?
I think so.
Okay, because I think
Yeah.
they're two different things, and yeah.
I'll follow your lead.
Can I, realistically, I'm going to just vote whatever way you tell me to vote. But just out of curiosity, I would love to know what would it, under the proposal here, how is that different? I understand what you're saying, that it's treated as two different groups, but I'm not sure how that plays out in the way that the question is currently. And I know I could find it in slide 112 out of 180, but.
Yeah, so let me give you some background on this. This was in a letter that was sent to OMB. A number of Arab American organizations and Iranian American organizations made this sort of recommendation, saying that NCT did it, in a manner that wasn't, as inclusive as it could be for the entire region. So this is where this kind of recommendation comes from. First, so then the answer to your second question, the way that it currently reads, as provided in the example here, is they list the three, in the sub-boxes, they list the three largest Middle Eastern populations, and then they list the three largest North African populations, and then they list three examples. So right now, the way it is, it's Lebanese, in the sub-boxes, it's Lebanese, Iranian, Syrian, Moroccan, Egyptian, Algerian. And in the examples, it's Israeli, Iraqi, Tunisian. So under the examples, you don't have any of the transnational groups, like the Kurds. You don't have any of the Gulf countries listed. So
Moroccan and Algerian are what gets taken out.
one of them could be put in as a other example of the African population.
So I'm actually going to suggest that I think they should probably be kept together, because part of the reason I think they were treated as two separate regions is to make sure that there was proper coverage so that people would recognize that they should go in there somehow, and that if you treat them separate, you would want to make sure that there's enough practical coverage so that all the people that should recognize themselves in that category would be able to, since you can't actually list out everything.
The reason that I suggested splitting it, but obviously whatever people want to go with, is because I actually agree with the second clause, so broadening the examples, but I don't agree with the treating MENA as one region when it comes to the check boxes. So, and there my hesitation is simply that we don't have any data, as far as I can tell, to show us that we would get better detailed reporting if we take this strategy to the check boxes. So I'm a little bit reluctant to ask for something if I don't know for sure that this lineup of, or I don't have some evidence to suggest that this lineup of check boxes that you're suggesting would get me better detailed reporting than what they have now. So if I have to, to lodge that objection, I have to also vote down the piece about the examples that I actually support. I'll do that, but that's why I'm suggesting they're two different things.
Is this
Carol?
really talking about check boxes? Are we? I'm getting more and more confused. Maybe it's the time of day, but I don't.
Well, so as I'm understanding it, Murad, tell me if I'm understanding correctly, that for what's at stake here in treating MENA as two different regions or one region has to do with how the Census Bureau designates what are the largest groups that should get checkboxes. So if we treat MENA as two regions, what they've effectively done to decide what the checkboxes will be, will take the three biggest, response groups in the Middle East, the three biggest response groups from North Africa. So that gives us one set of checkboxes, as Murad showed us. If instead they do away with that, and then they say, we don't care whether it's Middle East, North Africa, whatever, we're just going to take the six biggest, that's a different list, as he's shown but it just seems like we don't have any, we don't know that it would be better.
If you treat it as one
reporting.
region and you take the boxes, the check boxes, the largest populations, you'll be taking Moroccan and Algerian out, and you would be including Iraqi and Israeli in. And the thought is that the larger populations that are represented, you're going to get more people responding, but I don't know if that's how accurate that is.
I mean, I think it's totally plausible that may well be the case, but it may also be that those groups, they don't really need to see themselves in the check boxes. They're big enough, they'll check it anyway, and so maybe we'd actually get better response and detailed reporting if we have the smaller groups like the Algerian and, was it Tunisian? I can't remember. What you're saying is totally plausible, but I'm a little bit reluctant to ask for something unless I have some reason. Yeah. I know, I'm pretty confident it would give us better data.
So I'm confused.
I think Hassan can help.
Yeah, but so are we asking for the 2017 test to do this? Like the NCT?
2017 test is done. I mean, so we're
what
not asking
what's the time period we're asking here for?
I'm just asking for what goes on to finally the 2020
this would be the
census.
combined detailed box.
Okay, so we want them to change what they've been testing? I'm just trying to understand timing of like where this would fit into where they could actually affect the change of it, that's all.
The only thing we can realistically change or ask for change in now is the 2020 census itself, because 2017 is done. 2018, we learned today the wording is done. So
are they likely to change something they haven't necessarily tested? I don't know.
Maybe we could ask our subject. I doubt it, but.
Since Nicholas is here, can we hear his feedback for a minute?
You have 45 seconds.
Thanks for inviting us back. I wanted to give a little bit of clarification on what we did in 15 versus 17. I don't know if we can pull up a slide here, but this was in our discussion earlier today. The 2015 NCT tested the version that had the three largest groups from North Africa, the three largest groups in the Middle East. That's what was tested based on feedback from stakeholders, from looking at the research. We've moved forward for 17 with a version that has two groups from North Africa that are Arab origin, two from the Middle East that are Arab origin, and two groups that are from the entire MENA region, Israeli and Iranian, that are not Arab origin, but that help to broaden that diversity of the population. That's what we've recommended with our 17 version. And also we exchanged some of the example groups. So Kurdish, a transnational group, is already listed there. We think that's going to effectively help to broaden the diversity of what we're asking for.
So since this is, you're trying to affect the 2020 census, I just would like to hear more on it, and we don't have that much time today. So can we discuss this at the next one and then vote on it? So that's why I wanted to know the time period. If it's not going to be put in, we could talk about it in the fall.
I'm getting a nod,
Okay.
we can table it.
All right, yes, okay. So we're going to table this recommendation until we get more and schedule some time to talk about it. Go ahead. Were there any other recommendations that inadvertently got off the list, Gilberto?
Did we miss anything?
My recommendations were two. I would like us to reconsider the first one that didn't show up, but I rephrased it a little bit and just sent it to you.
Was this one that says, there was no author, it says, recommendation that the Bureau considers ways of collecting and tabulating the information included in the combined question with checkboxes on race and ethnicity to ensure a more accurate counting in the event that the OMB rejects the recommendation from the Bureau to include the combined question format?
Yeah.
So is that our like, so we won't know, when would we know that they would possibly reject that? That would be next, is it before next October? This October?
I hope so.
So we would know.
I hope we know.
Okay, so do we need to vote on this right now, or wait till fall?
I'm comfortable either way.
Oh, I think we'll wait. Okay, so we'll table this one too, but we'll make sure that it doesn't get lost for sure. Thank you. All right.
All right, thank you, Deedus and Carol. What a great job, a lot of recommendations.
Good job, Carol.
All right, well, I want to thank all of you for your time and your efforts. These issues aren't easy, as you know, so appreciate your due diligence and really thinking these through. Please note that the fall meetings will be November 2nd and 3rd. If you have any conflicts with that date, please reach out to Tara and the advisory committee branch. Don't forget to leave your badges. You can just leave them by your tent cards if you want, and we'll pick them up. Before we adjourn, I would like to give a formal thanks to our advisory committee branch, to Tara, to Kim, and to LaJoy for all the work that they do behind the scenes. Would also like to thank the Communications Directorate for putting together the virtual webcast, the staff from the IT for helping us out with the iPads and keeping all of our mics working, folks in the Conference and Travel who got us all here and hopefully will get us home, and also all of our presenters, subject matter experts, the hard work of the working groups, and all the other census offices that make this meeting happen. This concludes the, sorry, John wants to say something?
So just really quick. So they did pass a bill to extend the funding for 1 week while they work on a funding bill for the rest of the year. So that's good. So we don't have to worry about rushing home or anything.
Right. Yeah,
The government, the government's going to be operating. The other thing is, if before November something big breaks in the area of race and ethnicity, like OMB would say, these are the standards and all that, I think we would convene a virtual meeting so we can, not wait until November if it happens well before that.
Great, great.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, this concludes the meetings. Just a reminder that the bus will be leaving in about 15 minutes, and it's going to take you to the airport. Thank you all again. The meeting is adjourned.